I'm Rod Chappell, and welcome to the Rod Chappell Show. This is a show where we take sometimes very complex legal issues and put them in a way that we as the regular public can figure out what to do with them, whether that's a new law or a legal situation that's been caused by an old law. Today we have joining us Mr. Dimetrious Woods, and while it's a distinct pleasure to have him on the show and be with him, I'd rather not. We're here because this is a personal emergency that's been created out of a piece of legislation that has been interpreted to leave a whole group of people out. And I'm going to let Mr. Woods tell you about it. But during this show, unlike many others, we're going to actually ask you to take the law into your own hands, to be a part of the process and make a difference, not just in one man's life, but in the lives of over 100 individuals that are caught up in a system that was intending to free them and let them out and rejoin society, but instead has put them in some kind of purgatory, wondering what their actual status is. And today we have Mr. Woods. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
It's and before we actually go into the situation, tell us just a little bit about yourself. Where do you live now? Tell us, do you have family? What's your occupation? Who are you?
Demetrious Woods, by the way, but I'm from St. Louis, by way of Columbia throughout the years. Born and raised in St. Louis, lived in Columbia briefly, moved back to St. Louis, and from 96 on, in between having trouble with the law and everything, basically in Columbia, and started visiting St. Louis. Got into trouble is what originally brought me to Columbia, getting away from the trouble of the city. I'd adapted a disease of sort from my environment, my culture, and selling drugs, and which brought along a lot of other missorts, I guess I could say, in my character and my family. By the time I was early adult, late teens, my mom was tired of it, and Columbia was a resort for her. And of course, we know it didn't stop there. So back then at 17, I was convicted of a minor crack possession, I think, and an assault charge that I had from a juvenile. So I eventually went to prison for those. I think I did 4.5 years at that time. I was released. I come back to Columbia, and I always knew I wanted to live better, even though I come up and I adapted that type of attitude dealing with laws and my way of thinking. I was progressing by getting money, trying to put my family in a better place. I always wanted to do different, wanted to do better, wanted to do business. That was my thing. So being back out, I met like success in the streets, and I transitioned. I was trying to transition into business. I opened up a window tinting company, Tent Crafters, in Columbia.
You say tent crafters?
Tent Crafters,
okay.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And I also opened up Motivated Fashions, which was an urban clothing store in Parquet Plaza in Columbia. But I hadn't quite cleaned my act up totally. I was still associating with people from that lifestyle. I was seeping away, and of course that's something I express every day today is you have to be all the way right. It's just no playing with it, and that's what I was doing. I had one pinky toe in, and at that time is when I was arrested on Highway 70 with a nice amount of cocaine in the trunk of the vehicle. Me and my co-defendant became to be, which was a good childhood friend, mentor almost in the streets and stuff. He used to be messed up and just like me, his mentality. He was driving. He eventually, we were arrested, charged with drug trafficking. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 30 years with the possibility of parole.
Okay.
So me, I had a pending possession of a firearm charge, which I was sentenced to 4 years for, had put me in Bowling Green, where I was able to go to the law library, and I started investigating, because I was thinking with such a case with so many drugs, why aren't we in federal custody or what? And I was researching different legal things, so I exercised to go to trial. I fed into the constitutional right thing, but I didn't realize, it really didn't seep in that I was going to be punished for going to trial, and I was sentenced to, I went to a bench trial. We had a change of venue from Lafayette County to Clay County, and we went to a bench trial in front of Honorable Judge Horman, and I was sentenced to 25 years without the possibility of parole. Now, that attachment was put on my sentence because I was proven to be a prior drug offender. And that is the law that's in question. That's what this whole thing is over.
Yes.
Which is a separate attachment outside of your original charge, and in my case was drug trafficking, as well as my co-defendant. He was not charged as a prior because he pled guilty. That was kind of like a plea bargain type thing.
So let me ask you, Mr. Woods, if you had pled guilty, you would have had the option of parole.
Yes, and at home, I left out. He served 7 years, and he went up for parole. And of course, he changed his life around as well.
Sure.
And he received a 6-month out date.
But conversely, you exercised your right to go to trial, had the evidence tested, weighed by a court, but for doing so, they would not let you have parole?
Correct.
Okay, and that was based on a finding of being a prior persistent offender, which wouldn't have come into play with a guilty plea.
Well, and that's the tricky thing about the way these laws are applied, is because my co-defendant, my good friend, Raymond Brown, he was also a prior offender.
Oh.
And that's the way the system works. They can apply it when they want to or if they don't. And in our case, it was only applied. It's plain to see. It's kind of an unwritten law of sort.
Same car, essentially the same crime, trafficking drugs, two people charged with the same thing. One pleads, one doesn't, one gets a significantly lighter sentence, right? And
Correct.
The other gets locked up, no possibility of parole.
Correct.
Okay.
And that was my reality. So dealing with that, and that the 4 years turned into 29 years. So I had an out date for the 4 years, and I knew it was not probable to happen because I had this looming, and I knew the process I was going to have to go through. So the 4 turned to 29. They removed the out date on the 4-year sentence, and what they do with the no parole is they actually conditionally release you. So what they did is gave me a conditional release date on both sentences. So you have the 25.
Okay.
A conditional release is everything served in an institution but 5 years. They want you to have something left on supervision. So on the 4, I had to do 3 years. So with the totality of 23 years, I was expected to serve.
Wow.
Flat. And that would have made my out date 2029. Is what I was handed when I went into DOC.
Can I ask you, and you probably met some folks on the inside, I guess at Bowling Green, who had done some fairly serious crimes. Is that fair to say?
Oh, definitely, especially when I went to the Jefferson City Correctional Center.
Did you meet any murderers?
Plenty.
I know of a couple of folks who killed people, and are not doing 29 years. How do you, is there any way that we can conceptually rationalize 29 years and having to do, what do we say, 23 years flat, when other people have literally taken a life and getting less time for that?
Well, and that's kind of what great question, but and very, you would think common sense, and that was hard for me trying to figure that out in my mind. Once I was forced with dealing with my reality. But that's what brought us here today, because evidently some brighter probably people had come up with that. I thought that, so fast forward, I basically lose all of my appeals. I exhaust those remedies, and it comes into play. I become educated on the initiative process. And I tell my mom, I call home, I educate her on it, and it takes us about a year, and we have an initiative petition approved to remove no parole. Right. Now, I'm no genius, but I was enlightened. When I was there, all I did was watch educational shows, these type of shows, CNN, the Fox News, everything, just to be educated. And I seen Obama, nonviolent, we shouldn't do. He's in a federal prison with drug offenders sitting around, and I'm elated.
Yes.
But I said Missouri would have to be the last people to do something so progressive. Admitted, I wasn't optimistic.
Okay.
So we were going at the initiative process, which we realized was an uphill battle. Once we realized the way that those laws are still prehistorically designed, you know, to collect the signatures, have to be physical on pen and paper. That was pretty hard. We checked with a firm. It was like $100,000 for them to collect the signatures. And we just didn't have that type of funding. But at that time, when we were approved, which was a year of battling with the form of the initiative, they give you a physical statement from the state entity saying what this would affect, so the voters would know on the ballot what it costs, what it saved the state if your measure is voted upon. And within the responses, a couple of the state entities said, nice, but this statute, 195.295, which was the prior and persistent drug offender statute for the no parole attachment, is being repealed out of Senate Bill 491, which was passed 2014 and goes into effect 2017. So maybe this is 2015, so I'm like, wow. And they said, by the way, it doesn't affect you, it's only for people going forward. You and the rest of the guys, I think I paid, and I got the demographic of how many people were affected, incarcerated, on parole already, those sorts. And you and at that time, 150 or so guys are stuck. And I said, no way, no way. And I went to the law library in the Jefferson City Correctional Center, at which I lived there. I went to trial for litigation. So I was pretty familiar there, but this was a new uncharted territory of trying to interpret legislative intent and all those things. But I educated myself on the proper way to file it, to complain, which was a civil matter in the form of a declaratory judgment. I did the legal work. My family paid for the copies to go through the cases and different briefs from lawyers of previous cases, which doesn't come around often. Right. They usually don't change laws in the favor of convicts.
Not at all.
But they did, and I just knew by the death of me, I had to figure out a way. No way it could be good for citizens, humans like me, going forward, and not good for me. I still was a human. So I figured out a convincing way. I put together a motion, and I sent it to my post-conviction attorney, Kent Gibson. And at that time, Ken said, wow, how did you come up with this? It makes sense. I don't know where you came up with it or what, but man, I'm going to file it. And that made me happy that a lawyer, somebody, you know, believed in it.
And he's a good lawyer.
Yeah, and I believe in Kent. And so we filed it, and during that transition, we come in tune with Dan Hunt here in Jefferson City. And Dan gets involved, and he kind of litigates it with the circuit court. Daniel Green, and Honorable Daniel Green, eventually agreed with us. And in the meantime, I wasn't perfect inside, but I probably had in a maximum security prison, I probably had a next to perfect record. But I went through the ITC. I don't know if you're familiar.
A little bit. Would you tell our audience about that program?
It's the ITC stands for Intensive Therapeutic Community. It's a long-term drug treatment program in a maximum security Missouri prison in the Jefferson City Correctional Center. And it started back in the old walls by lifers, guys that were never going home, guys like myself. I wasn't promised when I volunteered. It's a volunteer program. I had 10/29/2029 was my out date. And it's an extensive program. By no means is it easy. You shave your facial hair, you get up at 4:45 in the morning. It's a military type regimen. That's peer driven, so you deal with people like myself. Once I graduated, I became somewhat of a facilitator and helping other individuals. But you have, you know, criminals like yourself, and you know, which we'll get into further, the effect I've had out here on the street. But it's nothing like peer driven. people who know your stuff.
Yeah.
You know, who you can, you can't run it over on. So I completed that program, man, and not only did it do a lot for my character, which I use every day, but and give me discipline and problem-solving skills and confrontation skills and stuff like that, but it created a path for parole. I believe that the parole, I know what went on within my hearing that I was eventually granted after Judge Green had sided with us and believed in our motion, believed that the parole eligibility was just an attachment to my sentence. That's the argument.
Right.
That's what it was. I never argued anything about my 25 and 4-year sentence. 29, okay, I was stuck with that.
Okay.
What we argued was that the parole eligibility, which the legislators so progressively changed within that bill, they erased it. They just took it out of the books. They said, this is horrible, we're throwing it away.
Right.
What we argued was that was just an attachment on my sentence. We know your sentence you're stuck with constitutionally. An attachment, if it changes, it's a procedure. And that's what we argued. It was just a procedure of doing the 29 to 25 years.
And because it's a procedure, it could be applied retroactively.
It could be applied retroactively,
Gotcha.
Correct.
Yeah.
And Judge Green sided with us. We went to the Court of Appeals. They were in limbo, which they transferred it to the Missouri Supreme Court, and that's how we ended up with the opinion on the 4th of February, with the 6-1 opinion that basically just said his parole was part of the sentence. We're not giving relief. Yes, it was a dissent. Yes.
Okay, okay.
And basically the dissent, and it went to what I believed in, and I believe what Judge Daniel Green referred to, the long line of cases that our Supreme Court had relied on for a number of decades that says that probation or parole is not a part of the sentence.
Right.
It's an attachment.
Right.
But they decided differently with this court, which we choose when we choose our legislative, our judicial process, we choose it.
Yeah.
And I say we as a people, even though I don't have that opportunity, hopefully soon I'll be able to vote, but
yes.
I'm still a citizen. So.
That's exactly right. And most importantly, and you hit on this earlier, that it's a question of humanity, right? I mean, and so we're talking about some issues that are pretty deep in the woods, because I'd run into that retroactivity issue before on a different piece of constitutional legislation on whether or how it was going to be applied. It's the idea of that people in the state who are citizens should be able to vote, right? The franchise is not taken away from other people, and that this is really much more of a human story than a legal one, right? I mean, there's a legal aspect to it, but it's a process that's manipulating people's lives, right? Tell us a little bit about what you've done. First of all, so you were in. How did Judge Green, with his decision at the circuit court level, is that what took us outside of the walls?
Not actually.
Okay.
It gave me the opportunity. What I essentially won was the eligibility for parole.
Okay.
And being that I had served 11 years, I had, you remember my co-defendant, he had went up for parole after 7 with a 30-year sentence, so I had a 29, so I was clearly over the range. I went up for parole immediately. DOC had to comply and give me a hearing. We went through a little turmoil with that, but I eventually was afforded a hearing, and the parole board told me that I was what DOC was built for. Right. I took full accountability for not just my actions within my offense, but my lifelong. You know, going through that program, that's what you deal with. You go all the way back to the little boy, you know, and you learn how to be honest. Yeah. And that creates the path for life. That's the key. But so I took full accountability and accountability going forward, knowing it's not going to be easy if I was afforded my freedom. And my parole plan, they told me, they went for it. I received an immediate out date.
Yes. And
they had a wide range. They had up until the 2029 date to do whatever.
What year was that?
I was released in 2018.
So 2018, is that 11 years early? Am I counting right?
12.
12.
Right under 12 years.
And they don't just hand out parole.
No.
No,
No, they simply could have told me, hey, Demetrious, you're not ready, we'll see you in 1 year.
Right.
But they told me, no, you're over ready. As soon as your home plan is prepared, you'll go home.
And since you've been home, tell us about life. What have you been up to?
It hasn't been easy. It's been easier though, being honest, than the way I used to live my life. I made my mind up when I was in there. Even before I went through that program, I had a spiritual awakening, man. I just wasn't going to sell drugs anymore.
Yeah.
And that was my Achilles. I never was just demonic and just out to do crime, and no, I was always just trying to put my family in a better place.
Yes.
And I thought drugs was a means of doing that. That's what was outside of my front door,
right.
you know. So if I figured if I get rid of drugs, that would give me a lot of peace in life. And outside of this situation looming over my head, because I failed to mention at the time where Judge Green granted me the eligibility through his ruling, the Attorney General appealed. So all of to date, right, I was released March 23rd, 2018. So we're going on 2 years. And people see me physically, I'm released, I'm here with you now, but within my mind and my emotion, within my thinking, I have to be prepared to go at any time during that 2 years. So I've kind of been an inhuman person.
Yes.
Probably beyond the stretch of most people's imagination, which it should be. That's why, since I've been out,
right.
One of the things I do, I share those feelings, I share those experiences with adults and youth, mainly troubled on both ends, because man, that's something. This is the decisions that I made close to 2 decades ago,
right.
and I'm still suffering from it. You know, when you make these type of decisions, they have long-lasting repercussions. You know, with that, I've been working. I come out. I was working for my mom. We had a family business in St. Louis. I got out. I went to my old shop. The tent shop is still going. A buddy kept it going. It's Tiger Tenting in Columbia. Now he taught me how to get my tenting together, so I started tenting on the side, saving up a bit of money, and I had decided when Nipsey Hussle was murdered, that kind of struck me personally, and I decided, man, I'm gonna live my life. You know, this stuff I'm doing concerts and things, things that wasn't real tangible that I could try to invest. Try to build. I'm a builder, man. I'm a hustler by heart. Yeah. I'm just not going to do it illegally.
Right.
But these concerts, man, that market is different. I'm kind of losing money. It's not the thing. I'm not happy with that. And when that happened to Nipsey, I said, man, why not be who I am? And I told my son, hey, man, let's open the shop. I'm ready. And he believed in me and went back up to Columbia, and where I was relatively familiar because that's the community I was in before I really left full time. And found a place, and we opened up a window tinting and detail shop. And just the thoughts went from there.
Is that still called Tiger Tinting?
No, actually that business is still open. My buddy runs it. I really turned that over to him, his family. But it's Woods Auto Spa.
Woods Auto Spa?
Yes. That's the new year. I used to, and it's kind of something I often don't share, but before I never put my name on something, you know, so it was kind of prideful to say, man, I'm doing it the right way.
Yes.
I'm going to put my name up there, you know. Before it was always, you know, hiding and things of this, which you can imagine in that lifestyle. Sure. But so we named it Woods Auto Spa. My son is a junior, so that kind of played in. And since then, we were open for maybe, we opened June of last year, 2019, so open for maybe 6 months or so, and in the middle of winter, we decided to invest in a food trailer, which is Munchie's Fish and Chicken. The St. Louis type cuisine, your fried and grilled foods that we provide in Columbia. So, and you know, like I said, with that, of course, a lot of advocating for my culture, my community, and in Columbia and just online, which touch so many different communities that I'm attached to in St. Louis, Missouri, just always being open about my experiences.
Well, and I see the shirt you have on, We Must Reform. Tell us about that effort.
That's a website that I had personally built. It's a website that I started about a year ago, more relative now, dealing with my personal issue, which, again, as you stated, doesn't just affect me, so it represents me and my issue, and the 100 or so guys who are stuck with no parole over this nonviolent issue.
Yes.
But just the name, for me, reform is a big thing. Jay-Z and those guys have reform thing, and the reform, it means a lot to me. It has a wide leg of things dealing with the criminal justice system,
Yes.
which we know affects a lot of people I relate to.
Yes,
so
that's right.
that's something that's dear to me. So I wanted to come up with a universal name. So
Yeah.
beyond me, and that my life is which during the public we see it's always been beyond me, but more so now.
Yes. Well, and that gets me to a point, because you raised the financial, what do we call it? Yeah, the physical note, the effect of the bill or the initiative that you initially started. I can imagine that not only do the legislature not want to keep extra people incarcerated that don't need to be there, okay, but that also there's a huge cost to that as well, right?
You betcha.
Yeah, and with well over 100 people, do you have any idea? I mean, are we thinking 100,000 or 300,000?
What is it, like 20? I want to say the last figure, maybe 23,000 a year minimum, which that may have grown per inmate.
Per inmate, and you figure
Times
that
100, so
for 2 years.
For 2 years, so that's what I've saved since being out. But 2 years since I've been out, majority of those guys, and that's a point to make too. Since 2014, when this was enacted, a lot of smart prosecutors stopped applying it.
Right.
So we're talking 100 and so guys who we know have served at least 6 years of hard time.
Right.
Because it's 2020.
Right.
At least.
Yes.
So guys, and it's guys that were there, most of those guys were there before me. So they're over 11 years for nonviolent drug offenses.
There's no way that we can call this reform effort that was done by the Missouri State Legislature as being soft on crime, right?
By no stretch.
No. It's just a more humane option on having dealt with a situation that many of them walked into just like you did and the other gentleman involved, right?
Yes, and going along with the statement I was just making was the one thing that we cannot argue, which I was educated on in the very beginning. I keep saying the sentence you're stuck with.
Yeah.
One thing that I understood first, because one of the compelling and heartbreaking things was within that progressive bill, which the legislators and the country evidently believes in. We hear it all the time.
Yes.
And the federal laws have changed dealing with drugs and the way they deal with citizens. They lowered the statutory means of all sentences for drug charges within Missouri, within this same bill. But I had to accept, it was hard, but I had to accept that today, no matter how many drugs you're caught with, the maximum you can face is 15 years with the eligibility of parole, because no eligibility was erased.
Right.
The statutory means were all lowered. At the time when I was sentenced, my statutory range, I was a Class A.
Okay.
It was 10 minimum to 30 or life, without the possibility of parole. And with that change, that was something I had to accept. And with the time I served, it wasn't very hard, because I knew as long as I had the eligibility and 11 years done, any human would say, hey, this is enough.
There can't be any doubt. I want to turn this, Mr. Woods, and I know we're at the close of the show, but I want to, at this point, there is an appeal. There's a call to action, and I'm going to state it, and then I'm going to ask you to talk on that just for a second, okay?
Yes.
At this point, we as citizens in Missouri have an option where we can reach out to the Attorney General, asking them to change their position on the appeal that is currently pending. We can call, or it's in letters, more importantly, to the governor's office, asking that the governor grant clemency to Mr. Woods in his situation, even while we try to work this out for the over 100 gentlemen that would also be affected. The disruption in this man's life, who's come back, and I think that, as you've articulated, worked with people in the community, worked with children, talked to adults, and tried to improve the prospects of people living within the law to improve their situation, never mind the effect it would have on you and your family, would just be a travesty of justice. That is something that we as citizens can do. We're providing the information on the screen on how to contact the Attorney General's office, how to contact the governor, and even a resource through an additional website, whether it's Mr. Woods' website, which is www.wemustreform.com, or I also know it'll be up on www.monaacp.org as well, so that you can get a letter, that you can send a communication to those offices, and we ask you to do that. But Mr. Woods, as we close out, tell